Hello all. I hope there are some familiar ears listening to this, returning after the first upload to be honest, quite a few weeks ago now. If so, thanks for your support and thanks for sticking with us. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. Make yourself comfy. If you do enjoy the content, please hit the like button and maybe even give the subscribe button a playful tap. Before we get started, I'd like to apologise for the gap between this content and the previous upload. There is a reason for this, maybe a flimsy reason, but it's a reason all the same. We'll give you more details on this later on. Okay, back to today. Our story today takes place across 2 continents, multiple crimes, and features a suspect desert. In August 2016, a young woman living in the Rego Park area of Queens, New York, USA, had just returned home from a period of recuperation in hospital after her landlord had discovered her close to death and surrounded by pills. Since she had left her Eastern European homeland, she was proud of the life she had made for herself, working as a beautician in the area around where she lived. However, as she lay in bed, disorientated and confused, all she wanted to do was rest, but things were such a blur and made so little sense, sleep did not come easily. To begin at the beginning, we need to go back a further 2 years to 2014 and to the town of Krasnodar, a large city on the Kuban River in the south of Russia. Here, a 54-year-old lady named Alla Alisenko was about to make a serious misjudgment of character. Her daughter, Nadezhda, had left Russia some time before to study in the US, and after these studies had concluded, she opted to stay in the United States and build a new life for herself. Whilst this was no doubt disappointing for Alla, she was proud of her daughter and supported her in forging her own way in life. The two remained very close and spoke to each other on the phone most days, sharing their experiences. The daughter would have had a lot to talk about, as she was affectionately known as being crazy. She was very outgoing and enjoyed socialising and sightseeing around cities, but also hiking and other outdoor pursuits. These exploits were widely shared on social media and built a picture of a happy young woman living in a new country and enjoying all it had to offer. Back in Russia, Alla was concluding a property sale. It is not 100% clear from my research, but it would suggest that a family member, possibly her mother, had passed away, and the house being sold was that belonging to the deceased. Luckily, Alla had a close friend living nearby who had experience in buying and selling property, and she was only too glad to help Alla navigate the process and successfully close the sale. Whilst the sale was going through, the friend, Victoria Nazirova, explained that she was looking to also move out of Russia, with the USA or Mexico being her preferred destinations. But she said that she would visit Nadezhda in New York before deciding where to settle. She had tired of life in Russia and, like Nadezhda, was looking for a fresh start overseas. Whilst this would have dismayed Alla, with her friend now following her daughter in leaving the country, she took the opportunity to buy an extravagant gift for her daughter, a mink coat. This she entrusted to Victoria to take with her when she left for the West, along with a large amount of money, the equivalent of $6,000. On the next call to her daughter, Alla proudly told her of the gift and money that would soon be coming her way. However, after weeks went by, there was no sign of Victoria making any progress towards her big move overseas, and Alla started to wonder if it was actually going to happen. When she pressed Victoria on this, she was evasive and said that she hadn't made up her mind at this point. Alla mentioned this to her daughter on one of their calls, and she felt awkward asking, but really would like the gift she had brought for her to be returned, along with the money. If Victoria wasn't going to be moving anytime soon, she would rather have it in her care. Whilst this was going to be a difficult conversation for Alla, her daughter told her that she was being silly, and of course that she was well within her rights to ask for the return of them. Knowing that her mother felt uncomfortable, Nadezhda herself contacted Victoria and requested she take the coat and cash back to her mother's as soon as possible. Victoria apologised. She hadn't realised that this was causing an issue and had stored them safely until she had finalised the details of her trip. She understood the issue immediately and agreed to take them back to Alla on the approaching Saturday evening. On the Sunday morning, Nadezhda decided to call her mother to check in as usual, but also to ensure that Victoria had been true to her word and returned the cash and coat. Alla's phone rang and rang, but no one picked up. Whilst this was strange, as Alla was expecting the call from Nadezhda, the daughter wasn't immediately concerned. However, after repeated attempts throughout the morning with the same result, Nadezhda did start to worry and decided to call Victoria and see if she knew where her mother had got to. On answering, Victoria seemed nonchalant and relaxed, saying that she thinks Alla had gone out for the day with a friend to visit a local monastery, something that she was known to do regularly. This did not prevent Nadezhda from growing increasingly concerned. After numerous further attempts to reach her mother, she booked a flight to return home as soon as possible. On arriving back in Russia, she went directly to her mother's home and began to look for her. There was no sign of her at the house, and nothing seemed to be out of place. She reported Alla missing to the local authorities, who began to investigate. Before long, checking Alla's phone records and discovering that the last call she received was from Victoria on the Saturday evening. The investigation progressed and Victoria was brought in for questioning, but she answered satisfactorily and was released. It was discovered fairly early on that not only was Alla missing the $52,000 from the property sale, a further estimated $17,000 she kept in the house, and various trinkets and jewellery also seemed to have disappeared. There was also no sign of the additional $6,000 nor the mink coat that Victoria had promised to return. Victoria continually denied that she was involved in Alla's disappearance and that she did not know where any of the missing cash or items had gone. Despite there being clear suspicion around her involvement, the investigation slowed to a snail's pace. With no evidence or leads, it would seem it was destined to grow cold. That was until CCTV footage was reviewed, specifically looking to trace Victoria's movement around the time of Alla's disappearance. Many hours of trawling eventually paid dividends when her car was identified on the footage some 160 kilometers from Krasnodar around the time of the disappearance. Victoria was brought back in for questioning and asked who the passenger was, clearly visible in some of the footage. She refused to answer questions on why she had travelled so far from home on that day and repeatedly denied that she had a passenger, despite it being a clear lie. Inexplicably, Victoria was released on bail pending further investigation. When further investigation had revealed that the passenger was indeed most likely Alla, they went to rearrest Victoria, only to find that she herself had now disappeared. She was placed on an international wanted list, with law enforcement across the world alerted to keep an eye out for the fugitive. In the ensuing internal review of the case, it was discovered that Victoria had researched the team involved in the investigation against her. She had then used her beauty and wiles to seduce one of the key players, starting a sexual relationship with him in exchange for details on the case. It was these details that enabled her to stay one step ahead of the police and the case building against her. Eventually, it gave her time to flee before the net finally closed. When the corrupt nature of the shambolic investigation became known, Nadezhda requested that the case should be taken over by the Minister of Internal Affairs. The request was immediately approved and the search for Alla resumed with renewed vigour. 6 months later, in April, charred human remains were found near Armarvi, an area in which Victoria's car had been spotted on the day of Alla's disappearance. After analysing the teeth and comparing them to dental records, it was established beyond reasonable doubt that unfortunately these remains were indeed those of Alla Alasenko. Nadezhda was understandably distraught and returned to her new home, Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn, New York, broken-hearted. 2 years later, in March 2017, a fellow Russian expat resident of Sheepshead Bay was arrested and taken into custody by New York police. The story of the arrest and the unbelievable web of crime that was revealed led to worldwide attention and a swathe of further accusations that may never be proven. The individual arrested was well known in certain circles as a stunning but cruel sex worker, the perfect mix for a lucrative career as a dominatrix madam. This individual was known interchangeably as Rachel or Mara. The raven-haired beauty was also a familiar face on the local party scene, known for living the high life, dressing in glamorous clothes and enjoying frequent trips abroad, with Mexico being a particular favourite. The crime for which she had been brought in was truly staggering, both for its audacity and motivation. Olga Svik, a beautician from the Rego Park area of Queens, New York, had just returned home from a period of recuperation in hospital. This followed her landlord finding her close to death and surrounded by pills. Disorientated and confused, she just wanted to rest, but discovered that her identification papers and a gold ring were missing from her apartment. The police were called when Olga began to piece together the events prior to her waking up in hospital. An especially glamorous client of hers had begged her to undertake an emergency eyelash repair, to which Olga agreed. When the client arrived, she was in good spirits and had bought a cheesecake for them to share as way of a thank you. However, she quickly ate 2 pieces herself before proffering the final piece to Olga, who took a few quick bites, eager to get the eyelash repaired. However, she almost immediately started to feel ill. She was dizzy and nauseous, and she staggered around the house. Soon afterwards, she vomited and went straight to bed. The client then let herself out, but came back the following day with chicken soup in an attempt to help Olga to feel better. This is the last thing Olga remembers before slipping into unconsciousness. 2 days later, Olga was found. In some reports it claims that it was her friend that discovered her, but a quote from Olga herself identifies that it was her landlord that had come to her rescue. She was discovered wearing lacy lingerie, lying on her bed with pills strewn across the bed and onto the floor. The heating had been set to 40 degrees Celsius, and she was very close to suffering catastrophic heart failure. Suspicion naturally shone brightly on the client, the last person Olga remembers seeing before blacking out. The cheesecake box was still present in Olga's kitchen, and the police conducted a chemical analysis which returned the results showing traces of phenazepam, a potent sedative developed in Russia in the 1970s. The race was now on to apprehend this mysterious client and bring her to justice. Little did the police know they were not the only ones on the lookout for this fugitive. The heartbroken Nadezhda had become increasingly aware of a beautiful Russian living the high life in the same neighbourhood in which she lived. Whilst not challenging her directly, she found she was active on Facebook and often posted pictures of a glamorous lifestyle. Finally, Nadezhda was convinced that this was Victoria. With the help of a generous friend's financial backing, Nadezhda employed the services of a retired NYPD detective, a man by the name of Herman Weisberg. Unfortunately, it was obvious that Victoria would not be using her real name, and, whilst they knew roughly the areas she frequented, they did not have a solid idea of where she was living. Weisberg turned again to social media, scouring the photos on Victoria's Facebook page. On one of the photos, he noticed unusual stitching on one of the car seats, leading him to look into the kind of car that the photo was taken in. He managed to establish that the stitching was unique to a particular type of high-end Chrysler 300. It was then a matter of searching for the distinctive vehicle in the neighbourhoods that they knew she frequented. After locating the vehicle, it was merely a case of waiting it out until the owner returned. In relation to the drugging of Olga, it was difficult for the police to establish a motive for this attempted murder, at least initially. It seemed a long way to go for some documents and a few pieces of jewellery. It was then that the penny eventually dropped. Olga, as a Ukrainian, spoke fluent Russian. Olga was glamorous with smouldering dark features. Olga was all alone in a foreign country. Therefore, Olga would not be missed. The goal of this murder was not to take Olga's life in the traditional meaning of the phrase. It was to literally take it, to steal it. With Olga out of the way, Victoria would have actually become Olga, a Russian-speaking legal immigrant with apparently legitimate papers allowing her to stay and work in the US. Crucially, the expat Olga was not on an international wanted list. As Olga, Victoria would have moved away from the area and started a fresh life with the stolen papers. The cold, calculating way in which it was planned and executed shocked detectives and the public, going as far as undressing Olga and placing her in lace underwear before spreading pills across the bed, detailed the lengths which Victoria had gone to cover her tracks. The arrest and realisation of just who they held in custody led to a cascade of allegations of crimes to be brought, not least the murder of Alla Alexyenko, whose daughter still lived in nearby Sheephead Bay, incredulously the same neighbourhood that Victoria had knowingly settled in. However, as Russia and the US have no extradition in place, it is unlikely that Victoria will face any charges in relation to the murder of Alla back in her hometown. However, following her arrest, a further victim of the criminal came forward. Ruben Burakov, also of Queens, had met Anna, this time, via an online dating site, and after chatting a few times he agreed to meet up with her. Expecting a night of passion, he was initially annoyed, as Anna had insisted that he to sit down and eat a fish meal she had cooked virtually as soon as he walked in the door. Nevertheless, he complied, and the next thing he remembers is waking up with around $500 missing from his wallet, his $800 watch likewise missing, and a credit card bill of a further $2,000 he had no knowledge of. The police are also building the case of two other men that have claimed to have been drugged and robbed in a similar way by either Victoria, Anna, Mara, or Rachel, and an incident where she is believed to have pawned men's jewellery. Owing to her career as a dominatrix madam, it is believed that there could be many more male victims that are too ashamed or concerned about their extracurricular activities to come forward. There is still yet the potential of adding further murders and thefts to the rap sheet. An investigation is underway back in Russia into the disappearance of a couple who have never been found. The last time they were seen was in 2014, and it is alleged that Nazarova herself sold their apartment and pocketed the money. As if we needed any further heinous accusations to assist us in forming an opinion of this character, she also stands accused of poisoning a former boyfriend's beagle, who died within 24 hours. After being brought to justice, this horror of a human being was put on trial in February of 2023 and found guilty of the following charges: attempted murder, attempted assault, second-degree assault, unlawful imprisonment, and attempted larceny. Sadly, as mentioned, due to the lack of judicial agreement between the US and the Russian government, Nazarova can only be tried for crimes committed on US soil. She is currently awaiting sentencing. And herein lies the reason for the delay on releasing this content. I thought it would be great to have it go live the day the sentence was passed down, which should have been the 21st of March 2023. Here, on the 22nd of March 2023, as I record this, after patiently waiting, I have now found that the sentencing was yesterday put back to the 18th of April 2023. It is expected that Nazarova will be sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Although this sentence will not take into account the heinous past of this psychopath, hopefully Nadezhda will take some comfort from knowing that her mother's alleged killer is no longer free to enjoy a life of crime and cannot hurt anyone else. It will be nice to think that if she completes her incarceration for the US crimes, she would then be forced to face charges of murder in Russia. Who knows? 25 years is a long time. If she does live through the sentence, who is to say that there could not have been a thaw in relations between the US and her homeland, allowing an extradition? I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on this case, and indeed the cases that have not been brought to trial due to the lack of this extradition. Also, when the sentence has been handed down in April, it would be great to get your guys' take on it in the comments, or any thoughts you may have in general. So, there we go. Another bizarre crime, an extreme case of attempted identity theft, a grisly murder, and a smattering of other crimes. If you enjoy this twisted story, please give the like button a friendly tap, and if you could subscribe also, it would be marvellous. We'll leave it there for now. Until next time, stay safe and stay inquisitive.